Welcome to my Uprooting Passion series with Onestas. Super excited to be here today with Lucio. Hi, Lucio. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, hello, how's it going?
Good, good. So excited to dig into your story today. And right now, you are a PhD researcher student at Michigan State, which is
Mhm.
incredibly impressive. Super excited to just draw the connections between your upbringing and what you're doing now with African studies. It sounds super interesting. So a little
Perfect.
backstory on our connection per se. We both went to the same universities in Rome. Never once crossed paths physically, but it's a really strong community out there in Rome. So really excited to be sharing your story.
Perfect.
So just hopping right in. First question is always, where were you born and raised?
Yeah, perfect. So I was born in San Antonio, Texas, and I ended up being raised in Rome, which is, thousands of miles away. And the reason is because I was adopted at birth, and I was lucky enough that I was adopted at birth, and so in my eyes, that never happened. But my mother's from San Francisco, my father's from northern Italy, and they got in contact with an adoption agency, and I was still in my biological mother's belly at 8 7 8 months, and they flew over to Texas the day I was born, and they picked me up, and I think we stayed in Texas for about a month, and then we flew out to Rome. And the reason why we were in Rome and the reason why I was raised in Rome is because my father really wanted me to be Italian, 100% Italian, and have that Italian education, which now thinking back, I'm very, very thankful to having had that education. So yeah, so I spent most of my life in Rome, and I spent some time in California during the summers growing up. So what I would do is spend the academic year in Rome for school, and then during the summer, the 3 months I would spend in San Francisco with my mother's side of the family. And that's my story. That's how I spent most of my childhood.
Wow, it's really interesting because I feel like for me, for example, like
Hmm.
my family was like opposite. Like so it's really
Okay.
interesting to see how that like Italians now maybe are more inclined to go back to Italy like for education, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Really, and
definitely.
I, from my personal experience, I can see that as well. But so your parents before you were born, were they living in California or in Italy?
They were living in Rome, so they met in the early 90s, and they were married in 92, and they married in Rome. And so they had a large community of friends in Rome. My father's family was still there, so he moved to Rome when he was 18 years old. So he was very much a Roman at that point. And then my mother would pretty much do the same thing of traveling to California during the summer. And so she's been living in Rome now for 30 years. Even though she's not legally an Italian, she's an Italian. She loves Italy more than the US, and she could never imagine not living in Rome. And sometimes she would talk to me about, perhaps moving to the US. And anytime she comes to the US, she just says, no, I miss Italy. I miss the Mediterranean. I miss the Italian culture, which is pretty much what she's made of now, just Italian culture.
Wow. And what brought her to Rome before? Like you said she was in
Yeah, so her story is very interesting. Perhaps even more interesting than my childhood story. So she was born in the Fillmore, and she was raised in San Francisco, and she wanted to be a dancer, a ballet dancer. And so she went to UC Irvine in Southern California, and she got a degree in dance. But then her best friend at the time told her, she was a playwright, and told her that she has this amazing play that's supposed to revolutionize the feminist and black field within Broadway. And she wanted to go to New York from California to present this proposal to Broadway and to Broadway productions. And they ended up taking a cross-country trip all the way to New York. They proposed the play, and casting director picked it up, and that became For Color Girls, which is a very well-known still play. That was, I think it was on Broadway for at least 2 decades. And eventually, she decided that the spotlight wasn't for her, and she became very spiritual. And so she moved to India, where she studied to become an Indian monk. And so she studied the Hindu faith, and she studied Sanskrit text, and there she learned yoga. And at the end of that path, she became a fully fledged yoga teacher. And I don't know exactly why she ended up in Rome, but I do know that she already had friends there. And so when she moved to Rome, it was to start her own yoga practice, which she did. And friend, her friends, she met my dad, and that's how they met. And that's why she stayed in Rome after that. And that was back in like the late 80s.
Wow. Well, that's
Yeah,
incredible. She has an incredible
she
story.
has an incredible story. Yes.
You have an incredible story, but I mean, you both have
She,
incredible stories. That's
yeah, she definitely does.
yeah. And I mean, wow. So I guess what was it like growing up? Not only, I mean, I could say just in your physical environment in Rome, but also just with your parental influences.
Yeah, I think that was incredibly important for me. My parents have always instilled in me kind of the lesson that whatever I do, like I can do whatever I want as long as I put my full interest in it. And so they were always flexible with my interests, which pretty much changed every other month. I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be all these different things, an actor, et cetera, et cetera. And no matter what I set myself out to do, they always supported me 100%. And that is, in a way, in a very important way, I think, why I'm where I'm at today. They supported me through my time at John Cabot, and they supported me through my time in changing majors like 3 different times because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And when I ended up with history, they still supported me 100%, and they still do. And I think that that flexibility and that freedom, while understanding that my decisions have consequences on my own life, I think that that was a major influence, a parental influence at least, on their part on my life. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's so important to have
Yeah,
that unconditional support. Um,
definitely.
and just how about growing up in Rome? And I mean, I know like there's always that sentiment of it's hard to truly feel like an Italian sometimes.
Yeah.
And how was it like growing up in that environment?
Oh, that was interesting. So on the one hand, the positives are that you're in the eternal city, and the culture, the food, the history, which is also part of why I am who I am right now. I was surrounded by history, and I had this desire for knowledge when it came to history, and I wanted to know everything I could about everything around me. And so that was kind of through books, through movies, through whatever museums, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of positives there. Other positives are my education. I had the chance to learn Latin and ancient Greek when I was in high school. Those are the kind of opportunities that are not really present here in the U.S. unless you do like a specialized program. And so all of those things I think shaped me into who I am. And of course, there was also the negative. I am, African American, a black kid growing up in a city that, it has a lot of tourism and it had a lot of diversity, but at least in residential areas, that diversity definitely was lacking in the early 2000s. And so when I was at school, I was often the only black kid. I was often the only black kid up until I think my sophomore year of high school. And so there were difficulties that I faced. Um, you know, Encounters with racism, encounters with hatred. But in a way, that also shaped me into who I am now because it taught me how to appreciate every different person, to be open to diversity, be open to different cultural backgrounds. And I think that that was incredibly important. And by experiencing it firsthand, being kind of on the opposing end of that hate, then you learn how to deal with it and help others through it as well. And I think that was incredibly important. So definitely 50-50 there with, positives and negatives. And of course, I think every location will have its positives and negatives. For me, it was the lack of diversity in my school. Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100% can see that. And just to your point, I would say that being the minority, or being sort of that, you know, outcast, maybe, like, you learn so
Hmm.
much more in a different way. Like, I would imagine
Yeah.
in a classroom, you're learning the same topics, but you probably learned it in such a different way,
In a
having
different way.
experience,
Yes.
which is such an advantage as well. And I
Yeah.
would imagine is what you're studying today maybe is so, well, I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
but really interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess before like getting more into your research and stuff, just one more question for your upbringing. Who was the
Hmm.
biggest influence for you in your upbringing?
Yeah, so I would say besides my parents, I would have to say my elementary school teacher. Her name was Margarita. Her name is Margarita. And I think that it, it seems kind of trivial, but the fact that she taught me how to read and write, and the fact that she just had so much love to give for me and for all of my other friends who were classmates, that really, really shaped me into who I am today. Because she taught us how to study. She taught us how to be open to diversity. She taught us how to learn, and learning with a smile, and learning about different people and different cultures and different times, etc. And so I went to a private Catholic school from basically from first grade all the way up until eighth grade. And so the experiences at a Catholic school are very different from those at a public school, right? And so, and I didn't go to a public school until high school. So, in a way, she was kind of our way out into the open world, that wasn't, morning mass or more rigorous training in education. And so she kind of gave us that freedom in her classroom to just be creative and explore through knowledge. And I think and I still keep in contact with her.
That's
And, this is after, 24 years, and I still keep in contact with her. And she still gives me advice to this day. So I think that she was definitely the main influence, yeah,
That's
growing up.
awesome. Yeah, I like what
Yeah.
you're saying, like kind of a connection to the outside world. Like I
Yeah.
personally go to private school, but like I can see how that's just so important to have a sort of more down to earth type of
Hmm.
teacher, especially early on. You said first grade?
First grade. Yeah.
Wow. Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I mean, and you're a teacher now, right?
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
correct. Yeah.
so that's
So
incredible.
yeah, a lot of what I do now is me kind of thinking back on what I learned when I was a kid. Yeah,
Yeah. That's
definitely.
great. And you have an incredible background in research, but I want to go back to I was reading through your career a
Yeah,
bit, and I want to start with your experience at African Impact. What
yeah,
was it like, and where did you think your career was headed at that time?
yeah. So African Impact was interesting because I didn't necessarily go there because of my career. I went there because I was 16, and I went there because at the time I had only really experienced living in Italy. And although I traveled every summer and went to California, I traveled all over Europe. I never really lived anywhere else but Rome. And
Mhm.
in my mind, if I didn't go somewhere to live, at least for a summer or 3, 4 months, whatever, I would be trapped into staying in Italy. And I say that with caution because I know a lot of my friends love Italy and want to be there forever, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. For me, it's different because I have a different background, and I come from two different places, and I have two different kinds of parents from different places in the world. And so for me, I had to experience more than just Rome, more
Yeah.
than just my high school. So I found this program, African Impact. I was lucky enough that my parents supported me to go there, and it was basically in the Great Kruger National Park in South Africa. And it was a program that lasted 3 months, and in it we were training to be conservation technicians. So I was a junior conservation technician, and our main job was to wake up very early in the morning and go on daily drives to protect the wildlife in the Great Kruger National Park. This is buffaloes, elephants, lions, leopards, rhinos, especially against poachers. So of course we were all very young. It's not like we're, out in the field against poachers, but what we would do is photograph them when we saw them, mark their location on the map, and then give that location to the park rangers, who would make sure that they were being protected against poaching and poachers. And I think that experience really like kind of jump started my life outside of Italy, because I met people from all over the world. I met people from Japan, I met people from India, I met people from the US or Canada, from all over Europe. And so that kind of coming together and that internationalism really, really fostered in me this kind of desire to go abroad. And so after I came back from this experience, I was sitting down with my parents and I told them, okay, I know I have 2 more years of high school left here, but I want to go to the US and I want to experience that part of of who I am, because I'd never experienced it before. And they were 100% supportive. So I moved to Boston because we had a family friend there, and I finished high school there. And after that, I spent a year in Los Angeles, and then eventually I came back. But I think the African Impact years were definitely important because it introduced me to more than just Italy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can imagine. And so so then you went to Boston and
hmm
LA. What was that like? Did you enjoy that more? Did you find it more diverse? How did you find that experience?
Yeah, so definitely it opened my eyes to the world. Of course, Boston is not as diverse as a place, say, like Los Angeles or New York, but it's still more diverse than what I'd experienced in Italy. So I was already happy with that.
Yeah.
I think that what it did is also introduce me to the American education system. So I was in an American public high school for the first time. And I think I'd had an idea of what that was like through movies, mainly, and what I heard from my cousins. But now I actually was living it, and I got a chance to live at least part of that, which I was incredibly happy about, because it was part of who I am, because I was still born in this country. So I wanted to experience some of that. For Los Angeles, I started out at Cal State LA, and it was just basically to get me started in college. I
Yeah.
ended up actually not liking Los Angeles at all, because it was so kind of like sprawling and sparse, and I couldn't really get anywhere without a car. And so it was very different than what Rome is, where you can walk everywhere. But I think it was still very important because it introduced me to college.
Yeah.
And so after that, I just went back to Rome and I went to AUR. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I saw that you were a translator. You were a self-employed translator. Tell me about
Yeah.
how you got into that. You started that yourself, or how did you get into?
Yeah, so I had some experience I started really small actually, from my mom's yoga flyers. So one time she just needed all her yoga flyers like translated from English to Italian, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And while I was doing it, I actually thought to myself, well, I know English and Italian fluently. I'm bilingual. Why not use this to get a little cash? And so I mainly started with my mom's friends or people I knew. I just spoke to everyone and anyone I knew, and over time, I kind of got more people interested in it, and I was kind of doing it. Of course, it wasn't enough to support myself independently, but I was still like a kid. I was still 16, 17, then when I was 18 in Boston. And so I would just do this remotely. So I would just have people email me whatever they needed translated, and I would. Yeah,
That's really cool.
yeah,
I know that like I've heard some people do that in Italy, but like still just like that you had that idea and that entrepreneurial spirit to
yeah,
do
yeah.
your
That's all it was really. I mean, it just gave me an extra,
own.
few bucks, but it
Yeah.
was it was it was just for the experience mainly.
But also a good reflection of the multiculturalism in
Yeah,
your life and how you have
definitely.
both those cultures, which is really
Yeah.
cool, definitely an advantage.
Yeah.
And it seems like you have some crossover of AI, or not some crossover, but or maybe crossover, but you have some experience with AI. Do
Yeah.
you see that at all with what you're doing now, or is that something sort of separate that you kind of indulge?
Yeah. So I basically became a consultant for this data company, which is primarily because of my expertise in African history in the African diaspora. And so they're building a language model, and they need experts from all over the world, all over all kind of fields. And I think that at first I said, well, I'm never going to use AI. This is just something to make extra money. But over time and through teaching, I'm learning now that it is impossible for us to disconnect our life from AI now. It is embedded in everything and everything we do. And in a few years, it will become the main thing that we use for research, for education purposes, even for day-to-day things like, checking out at a store or whatever. And so I started to think about the ways in which I can uh, kind of use it for my own purposes. And at this time, I just use it to polish my writing. And so there will be certain times where I have a really interesting idea, and I see it in my head, but I can't really get it on paper.
Mm,
And I before AI, I would just write as much as I could and then get feedback on from other people, and that would be it. But with AI, I feel like I can really do that in a fraction of the time, and my ideas are more polished.
yeah,
And when I was teaching assistant last year, because I teach at the college level, like big classes, 100, 150 students, and so what will happen is that a lot of students now, undergrads, they'll write their essays with AI. And so we're at a point here where our AI detecting capabilities are not really as strong.
mm,
So it's really hard to differentiate between what a student writes on their own and what a student writes on AI. And I am against the idea that I should punish them completely if they use AI at all. I think that the AI could be a very useful tool for someone who's learning.
yeah,
It is important, though, to kind of like bridge the okay, learning on my own and my own knowledge and what AI can teach me or what AI can show me. And what I saw that I could do in the classroom is simplify complex arguments that are found in academic and scholarly works that perhaps a freshman will not be able to understand at first. And
right.
I think it shortens the time. So I do see crossover, and I think that it's just going to become more and more relevant to the field of teaching as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just feel like in general too, I'm working in for an educational nonprofit,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
I wrote a little article last month to our students that it's not AI that's going to take your job, but people who know how to
Yeah.
use it. I mean,
Exactly.
where there's
Yeah.
cases where AI might take your job.
Yeah.
But but definitely, I don't think, like you said, like we should punish students for using it at
Yeah.
all. 'Cause I
No.
think actually it's like to their disadvantage to discourage the use of it. So I think,
Definitely. Yeah.
and it's still such a I guess gray area time in trying to figure
Yeah.
out how to implement this.
Yes.
But yeah, super interesting. And all right, so getting into your research, which I'm really interested to learn
Yeah.
about. You primarily research slave trade and its
Hmm.
impact on pre-colonial Ghana.
Yeah.
What is your main question you're researching, and what drew you to the topic?
Yeah. So I should preface by saying that my dissertation now and my research as a whole is ever changing because of the current climate and current policies of the administration. I'm seeing firsthand what is happening with research. And as PhD students, we need funding to do field work. And if the funding is not there, then we have to creatively try to figure out how our area can be changed.
Mm,
So at first, I started off from pre-colonial Ghana, and I was very interested in seeing how the slave trade impacted the social political development of of Ghanaian pre-colonial states. I was very interested in that. I still am. But now the question has become bigger in a way. And now I'm mainly concerned with the movement of enslaved Africans from Ghana across the Atlantic into the New World. And my main question is, how could enslaved Africans who were transported against their will throughout the Atlantic world retain their agency? Retain their agency through cultural practices. And so now I'm looking at the colonial island of Antigua, which is in the British Caribbean. And Antigua in the 17th century became a British colony. And what happened is that was around the same time that the sugar revolution occurred. Of course, to have sugar, you need sugarcane plantations. And to have sugarcane plantations, you need a large number of laborers, of workers working the land 24/7. And for this, Britain turned towards West Africa. And so the exploitation continued, and you see that the rise of sugarcane production and sugarcane plantations equates the rise of the Atlantic slavery. And so my main research looks at the plantation landscape itself. So how did the sugarcane plantation impact the landscape of this colonial island? And how does spatial proximity within these plantations impact the bonds that are formed among these enslaved Africans? And so a lot of the research I do is through oral histories and oral traditions of enslaved Africans that were brought across the Atlantic, and a lot of it is also archival work and materials. But to me, the most important thing is to center the African perspective. That is incredibly important to me because for decades now, for centuries really, there's been a bias in the archive. Everything that we know that has been written down has been written down by enslavers. So how do we bring the agency of the enslaved African to the forefront of our research? And the only way to do that is to talk to present day Africans or present day creolized communities and get their oral traditions
Yeah.
written down and understand how they inform us about their development as communities, how they inform us as to their development throughout the generations. And so that is mainly what I do, kind of like looking at the impact, the broader impacts of the slave trade. Yeah.
Can you tell me at all some of these
hmm
stories or some of these conversations that you've had with
Yeah.
activists on
So
topic?
Yeah, so I went to Ghana last summer and I had the opportunity to talk to several elders of this kingdom that I was primarily focused on, which is the kingdom of Dinchira. And when I was sitting down with them, they were telling me how important these oral histories are to the preservation of their culture. And they told me that since their kingdom was ultimately destroyed by another bigger kingdom that a lot of people know, the Asante Empire, since their kingdom was destroyed, the only way to kind of retain the their former might and their former strength as a society is through these histories, through these oral traditions. And there is a lot of pride that goes into retelling these histories, and a lot of them are performances, but a lot of them are also heartfelt kind of explanations on why the slave trade impacted Africans so much. And I think that that is incredibly important for us to actually understand how day-to-day operations, for example, in a society like a society in central Ghana functioned before, during, and after the slave trade.
Yeah, I mean, from an American education perspective,
Yeah,
that would definitely be something that is heavily missed out
yeah.
and kind of leads to my next question of what is the biggest misconception you see
hmm
in the education surrounding slavery on a more general level that maybe more people can learn something from it.
Yeah, so let's see. I think the biggest misconception of slavery, well, there's definitely one misconception that bothers me to this day is people defending the role or the impact of slavery in Africa by saying that Africans participated in the slave trade, and
Mm,
why should we recognize the agency of enslaved Africans, or why should we victimize enslaved Africans if their own people, this is in quotes, of course, participated in in slavery. And to that, I say that the forms of slavery between Africa and the New World, America, or the Americas, are incredibly different.
mm,
So in West Africa, it wasn't the whole community that participated in slavery. It was the ruling elites. So the ruling elites had the resources to participate in slavery, and so they did. And so they sold enslaved people. While in the New World, you have a slave society. Labor is primarily based on slavery. West Africa wasn't like this. It wasn't a slave society. It was a society with slaves. There were enslaved people that were working, but that wasn't the primary export. The primary export in Ghana was gold. It wasn't enslaved people, right? And I think that what's also important to differentiate is that for Africans, they were not selling their own people because race did not play a part in African slavery at all, actually. What played a part in African slavery was status, social status. So you were either enslaved through capture in war, or you were enslaved because you were born into slavery. And this is very similar to other kinds of slave systems in throughout history. If you think of the ancient Roman Empire or ancient Greece, the ancient Greek city-states, the slavery, this is what happened. It was a social status issue. Um, so they weren't trading their own people. They were trading what they saw as commodities, obviously wrongfully, but that's also our modern perspective of it. When the enslaved African arrived in the New World, then he was treated as inferior because of his skin color. Because in the New World, as a slave society, it was built on the idea that if you were black, you were inferior. And this is the way in which European enslavers and American enslavers kept their enslavers down, basically. Despite their best efforts, they could not be kept down because enslaved Africans still had agency and demonstrated this through slave rebellions, retentions of African culture, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
and this is really important that you do this work because I see this coming up
Yeah.
a lot online,
Yeah.
like this argument all of a sudden
Hmm.
making its way again, and
Yeah.
it's so important that it's reframed and addressed in the way that
Yeah.
I mean, in your work.
Yeah.
Um, has there been a particular moment in teaching or just your research or in these
Hmm.
conversations that like truly solidified your purpose for your work where you were like, yeah, this is, I mean, you've
Yeah.
covered so much already where I can see it, but just if there was a
Yeah.
person story in particular that you had where you're like, yeah, this is
Right.
100% what I'm supposed to be doing.
So in teaching, I would say that I taught 3 classes, and throughout those classes, I actively helped students, and it was actually quite frightening to me to see how little effort I had to make into for them to feel welcomed and for them to feel safe and for them to participate in a class feeling like it was a safe environment. And I say this because they came up to me at the end of the semester telling me, oh well, this was the best class I ever took. And I actually asked, why is that? And they told me, oh, it's because you're so understanding as a teacher, or it's because you've shown us that this is a safe environment. And what was frightening to me was that I wasn't really doing that much. I was just respecting them. I
Yeah.
was listening to their concerns. I was being a human, right? And so this kind of made me think of, I wonder what other professors or other teachers do on a day-to-day basis in their classrooms to make these students terribly afraid of them and make these students think like it's a stress-filled environment. And so I think through teaching, the main thing that I can do is make students feel welcomed and help them through their problems. So instead of getting upset with them if they didn't do the assignment, you would give them as many opportunities as you can to save their grade. Because at the end of the day, I hate failing people, right? And I think that this should be more common. And I say that knowing that I was once that student, and I've been through a lot of teachers and a lot of professors who I was just terrified of because they didn't really treat us the same way as they would treat their colleague or something. And this is, to me, that's what a classroom is. I'm not necessarily the teacher here to lecture you. I'm just trying to make sense of the material with you guys. So that's what I would say.
And I think too is like that's how you learn. Those students
Yeah,
probably
that is how you
I'm
learn.
saying it's the
Yeah.
best. They respect you, they feel
Yeah.
comfortable, and they're actually like gonna be able to show up and learn something.
Yeah.
You're not gonna listen to someone who you don't feel like you're comfortable, and that's why
No, exactly. Yeah.
that's so important that you create that environment. And
Yeah.
it sounds like, to draw a little full circle, that's the
Yeah.
kind of environment you grew up in, where your
Yeah,
parents were
definitely.
constantly supporting you, constantly like not what's the way to say it, punishing you for
Exactly. Yeah.
something maybe a little different or changing your mind.
Mhm.
And so I can see how you're able to bring that into the classroom because
Yeah.
that's how you were taught as well.
Yeah, I
So
agree. Yeah.
that's really great. And it also it takes one professor, it takes one
It
teacher,
does.
one
Yeah.
person to kind of change a whole student's or just people in general's
Yeah.
entire look on the world. And so it really is important, and it starts with your parents and the impact they had
Yeah,
on you. So that's
definitely.
really awesome. And I mean, I kind of asked sort of similar questions, but just my last question is just what
Mhm.
is the greatest impact you wish to see through either teaching or your research?
Um, I think that the biggest impact I want to see is more interest in the kind of history I do. And I think we should all be interested in this. It's not a matter of, okay, maybe not my specific niche topic because I'm writing this 400-page dissertation on this small thing in
Yeah.
the Atlantic, but I think it's more a recognition of the fact that our modern world was built on the backs of enslaved people. There would have been no industrial revolution without the kind of industry or industrious work that occurred on these plantations. There would not have been a modern world without the slave trade, because that is what made all these European countries so wealthy and able to fund these kind of like industrial projects. And once the Industrial Revolution occurred, then slavery was not as needed as it was before. You see a shift capitalism takes kind of a different turn. And you still have, of course, you still have segregation, and you still have slavery in the United States until 1865, etc. But I think that's the most important thing that we have to remember, is that a lot of the things we give for granted now happened because of the slave trade. Yeah,
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 100%. I
yeah,
truly applaud what you do and respect what you do. Just and also because of what my mission is with what I'm doing.
yeah.
Where did we come from? Where did this nation come from? How did we get
Hmm.
to where we are now? And so I think you're definitely answering a lot of those questions, and I truly appreciate what you're doing. And
Thank you.
just also, what your parents have done for you, and
Yeah,
it's really great to see, and
yeah,
I look
yeah,
forward to seeing more of your work. And I think all of what you're doing right now is especially important right now, and
yeah,
current political climate and
yeah.
the things that are happening on a daily basis. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of weird things going on, and
Yeah.
you are in a position to truly lead and teach, and you're doing a great job at it. So
Thank you. Thank you.
major kudos to you. And yeah, so thanks again for letting me share your story.
Of
And
course.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you for what you do too. I think that it's incredibly important to see these kind of interviews because I was scrolling through the Honestus site, and so I think that the kind of questions that you asked are really important to get to know the person beyond their work. And I think that you could ask who was your mentor, or where did you learn the methodologies that you use nowadays, or the kind of questions. But I think to get to the core of who we are as scholars, or who we are as people, professionals, whatever, you really have to go back to what informed this research. And 99% of the time is something that happened in childhood, or people, a specific person that had an impact on your early years in life. So I think that that's great what you're doing, and I hope to see more interviews with more different people. Yeah, I think that's great.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Right.